Hey comic book fans, welcome back to The Brave and the Boys. I'm your host Jake, and today our topic is every DC Crisis Omnibus ever. So, as the title says, I have every DC Crisis Omnibus. We're going to go dive deep into each one, talk about what you should read, maybe a book or two that adds more context, and tell you what I love about them and some history behind them. So we're going to go in chronological order. Let's dive in.
Deep within a bleak and dismal swamp, hidden beneath its murky waters, lies the headquarters of the most sinister villains of all time, the Legion of Doom.
Okay, I know what you're all thinking. This video was titled Every DC Crisis Omnibus Ever, and this is an absolute and this is a deluxe. There is no omnibus for Crisis on Infinite Earths. There is a really cool looking box set that I did not have permission to buy for this video, but I did ask. But it is essential to understanding all the subsequent crises. Crisis on Infinite Earths was written by Marv Wolfman and with incredible art by George Perez. He adds hundreds of characters on each panel together, and it's like shocking when you like zoom in at how much details in each art. So the art in Crisis on Infinite Earths is incredible, and it has some of the most iconic covers of all time. I'm looking at you, Crisis on Infinite Earths number 7. So as I said, there's a trade paperback, there's a deluxe, there's an absolute, and it is the Crisis that started it all. So to give you some background history, at the time, there was a lot of different continuities and realities all going on, and it was really complex and confusing. This was around 1984, 85. This book, I think, came out in 1986. So what DC editorial decided to do is, let's wipe the slate clean. So they invented this character, this cosmic level villain known as the Anti-Monitor, and he was going around from Earth to Earth, destroying Earths, just decimating entire realities. So his counterpart, the Monitor, Anti-Monitor, he got a team of heroes, and they decided to save the multiverse. So it's an epic story, amazing characters. Some characters live, some characters die, some worlds live, worlds die. That's their whole motto, and nothing was ever the same. So as the Anti-Monitor is going on his destructive campaign, all the different Earths have to stand up unified together to fight him. The lasting implications of this was all of the other Earths were decimated and wiped out, and there was just one single Earth, one single reality moving forward. Certain characters went away off into a heaven reality, other characters never existed, and it really set a new continuity moving forward that any readers can jump in. So for a reader like me, I collect anything DC post-Crisis, so everything post-1986, because I think that is the best perfect jumping on point for new readers. So Crisis eliminated the tons of thousands of realities, and we had one reality going forward. But what happens if that heaven dimension didn't stay perfect? The first follow-up of Crisis on Infinite Earths came out in 1994. That is 0 Hour Crisis in Time. This was written by Dan Jurgens with art by Jerry Ordway. A recurring theme that you'll notice among the different Crisis is that they all had something that they wanted to fix or change. So while Crisis on Infinite Earths fixed the multiple reality problem, DC still had a problem of a bunch of different timelines. Where did the Legion of Superheroes fit in? Where did the Justice Society fit in? There's a lot of different timelines going around. So this decided to make one unified timeline. So there's a couple villains in this one. There's the villain Extant, who his identity is a mystery. It starts rewriting time, try to rewrite history. You'll get to meet a lot of different characters. You meet different versions of those characters, and you also deal with the villain Parallax, which is Green Lantern, but evil, gray hair, bunch of rings. It's a really iconic story. I have to be honest, I haven't read the full omnibus. I've read parts of the main storyline. It's just not really my thing. However, if we were doing a list of every Crisis ever, so I had to include it. I hope to get through it someday. There's some cool parts, like Dark Knight Returns Batman is in there. You get the iconic shot of, Hal Jordan with a bunch of rings. There's some really iconic stuff. However, personally, I still need to get through it. Let's move on to an omnibus that I have read completely, and I've actually read more than once. Now we move on to Infinite Crisis, which came out in 2005 and is my absolute favorite event omnibus. So Infinite Crisis is a direct sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was written by Jeff Johns with various artists. I'll list them all down below because there's too many to name. And it follows the characters that went to that heaven dimension. It's almost a meta commentary on what was going on with DC at the time. The people that sacrificed themselves at the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths that were watching over the DC universe see how dark things have gotten. Things such as Wonder Woman beheading Maxwell Lord live on television, Superman being murdered, Batman's backbreaking, all these really dark things. Characters were less black and white, and they're more morally gray. And it's almost a look at DC Comics as a whole. So the people that were left in the Heaven Dimension aren't happy with the way the heroes are acting. Why are they stuck up there and not down below when they would actually be real heroes? So it answers the question about what makes a hero. I don't want to go too into spoilers, but one thing I love about this event omnibus is every single side event built and set the tone, from the origin of the shocking stuff that happens with Blue Beetle, to the Rand Thanagar War, to the Secret Six. I mean, there's just all the different, the OMAC project, every storyline builds up together and it just tells one epic overarching story. I can't sing the praises of this omnibus higher enough. There are other Crisis that I love just as much, but their omnibuses, their side stories don't flow together as well. So Infinite Crisis is one, the omnibus everyone has to own. I highly recommend it. And the outcome of this one is when Crisis took there to be one reality, now the multiverse is reborn. So what happens after the multiverse is reborn? What happens to Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman? Well, there's another book that follows this that we're going to talk about next. It's not an actual Crisis. However, it perfectly bridges the gap between Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, and that's going to be 52. For those of you who watch these videos, you know I love throwing in bonus ones, so you can't just skip ahead and get all the books. This was one I highly recommend reading. This is 52. So at the end of Infinite Crisis, I won't go too into spoilers, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman take a year off. After that, DC Comics continuity jumped ahead a year. So to bridge in that gap for that year that jumped ahead, they created a weekly series, 52, not to be confused with the new 52. 52 was written by Jeff Johns, Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, and many others, and it follows a lot of the B-list, C-list, D-list heroes with a new issue coming out every single week for a whole year so that it would catch up. Amazing stories. You have Booster Gold, Black Adam, A New Question. The storylines were awesome and I love it. It's one of the first things I ever read. I didn't know about all the continuity before or after. I hadn't even read Infinite Crisis yet, but 52, phenomenal. It's not a full Crisis, but it definitely bridges the gap. So after Infinite Crisis, you definitely want to throw in 52. Now, let's move on to the Final Crisis. It's not actually the Final Crisis, but it's just called Final Crisis. Up next, we have the least new reader friendly and the one that probably requires the most homework. That is Grant Morrison's Final Crisis. Now, I have to let you guys know, this was the first story I ever read. I picked up a random trade of Final Crisis and I read it, and I didn't know enough to know what I didn't know. That being said, there are several books that you're going to want to include, which I'm going to show you guys right next, before you read Final Crisis, and one that you want to read after. Most of them are going to be written by Grant Morrison. That's because he was weaving this overarching tale that went through multiple titles and reshaped the DC universe. To give you a little bit of background, one of the New Gods, now if you don't know the New Gods, you're going to want to read one of the books beforehand, gets murdered. And so basically it's like a god from heaven falls to earth dead. And that sparks off a war of Darkseid, the ruler of Apocalypse, taking over the earth. Now there's some shocking moments in this book, such as the apparent death of Batman, the return of the original Flash, who we haven't seen since the first Crisis, and many other things. It's the most cerebral, it's the most philosophical, and I think once you really grasp it, one of the best Crisis. I will say though, the omnibus is a little tricky because it does have a lot of tie-in issues, but it doesn't flow together as well as, say, Infinite Crisis, where every side issue was integral to the story. I think you would be okay with the Absolute, or a Deluxe, or a trade paperback of Final Crisis. You just want to make sure you're getting the full Final Crisis story, but I think you will get a lot more out of it if you include some of these next books that I'm going to show you right now. Okay, I know this looks crazy. I promise you don't have to read every one of these books. This just is a way to get more context. Now, what to read for Final Crisis is a really contentious topic. I have my opinions. Countdown to Final Crisis, chuck it out of here. I didn't include it for a reason. The books that I do think add a lot of context to it would be Fourth World by Jack Kirby. This gives you a taste of the New Gods, what the politics are like, what the universe is like. Grant Morrison's run on Batman, which introduces Damian Wayne and sets the tone for a lot of things that are coming. The Seven Soldiers of Victory Omnibus, which I think thematically ties into Final Crisis. Then Final Crisis itself. Again, some of the tie-ins in this Omni not as important, but the main story, the ones that are included are there. There's the shockiness that happens with Bruce Wayne, which then leads into the return of Bruce Wayne in this one, and obviously the ending of his Batman run. So all of these add more context to the story. Again, you don't need them. You can really just read Final Crisis by itself, but if you want to see the narrative that Grant Morrison was weaving for a decade, this is the way to go. Now I'm going to include a bonus on the bonus section. Multiversity, which Jordan should have brought the deluxe, and I should just buy the absolute already. This is a great follow-up to Final Crisis. Grant Morrison, for a lot of his books, even ones that don't really relate to Final Crisis, have all been about the multiverse, and he teases how it's mapped out. This is where he actually maps it out. So if you want to see how Grant Morrison sees not just the multiverse of comics, but probably the multiverse of his own life, Multiversity is the way to go. All of these books are going to add so much context to Final Crisis. However, like I said, Final Crisis was the first thing that I ever read, so you don't need any of these. You can just jump in and go for a wild ride. Final Crisis is a story of a war in heaven that sends the devil to earth, where evil wins. Evil wins. Crazy things happen. It's a bombastic event, and it's up there with the best of the crises. Next up, we have another crisis written by Jeff Johns, this time with art by Andy Kubert. This story is fantastic. It's going to be in an upcoming movie, the Flash movie, and you've seen it on TV, so I'm sure all of us know the story by now. So Barry wakes up in a new world. Through his investigation, he realizes this world is different because he changed the past. He went back in time and stopped his mom from being murdered. Along the way, they had huge ramifications for the entire DC universe, such as Superman never existing, a war breaking out between the Atlanteans and Themyscira, and an evil gun-wielding Batman named Thomas Wayne. So it's a crazy story, tons of villains, and in the end, Barry has to make the ultimate sacrifice. The lasting repercussions of his choices completely altered every fabric of the DC reality at that time, ushering in a whole new continuity known as the New 52. It's crazy. It's like, how dark can the DC universe be? Because it is a pretty shitty world. Amazing story. Everyone should read it. And if you read it now, you can be that know-it-all that knows how the movie's gonna go. So highly recommend it. Now let's move on to my favorite crisis. The last omnibus on this list, but not the last crisis we're going to talk about, is Dark Knight's Metal. As I said, this was my favorite, and probably because this was the first one I got to read when individual issues were coming out. So all the previous crises had happened before my time. Dark Knight Metal is an awesome story where you have evil, dark, twisted versions of Batman coming from the dark universe, such as the Batman Who Laughs. What if the Joker and the Batman had merged? The Drowned. What if Aquaman was an evil Batman? Murder Machine and the Red Death. What if Batman had strapped the Flash to the Batmobile and merged into an evil, dark, murderous Flash? Incredible. This omnibus is awesome because it includes all the tie-ins. Originally, I had a trade paperback of one, a deluxe of the other, and then an oversized hard. It was all different formats to try to get, it was in chronological order, but this includes it all in the best way possible. Dark Knight's Metal is awesome because it sets the tone for an entire new Justice League story that preceded it, an entire new Batman story, and an even darker, more crazy, bombastic crisis that takes place after it. So at the end of this storyline, after facing against the dark, evil, twisted Batman, the only way that they can stop them is by harnessing the powers of new magical metals and destroying the source wall, which was literally the wall that covered around creation. After destroying the source wall, anything was possible in the universe, including a villain the likes of which had never been seen. So this is going to segue into the last crisis that we have. However, that omnibus doesn't come out until January, so I'm going to include that in the bonus section rather than making it its own omnibus. So let's look at the bonus section. Again, you all can read Dark Knight's Metal by itself, but if you want the full story, you want to read Scott Snyder's entire thing. One thing that you'll notice through like the Grant Morrison one or this one is DC likes to give one creator the keys to the kingdom, where they say, here's my magnum opus, peace out bitches. After they're done, let me go make my creator own content. This is Scott Snyder's magnum opus. So it starts with his Batman run in New 52. You can read this directly after the Flash creates the New 52. It all is going to lead into, with little seeds that get set into his Metal run. After his Metal run, they destroy the source wall. The problem and fallout of the source wall being destroyed is then picked up through the Justice League run, where they deal with the fallout of the source wall being destroyed and the rise of a villain named Perpetua, as well as the ongoing effects of the Batman Who Laughs, the evil Joker Batman. You also get the Grim Knight, which is kind of like if the Batman used guns. We already had the Batman that used guns and Thomas Wayne, so I call him like the Punisher Batman, but this is awesome. And then it all leads into Death Metal, which is not an omnibus yet, but it is coming out in January, so maybe we'll refilm this video in January, but I was too excited, didn't want to come out now. So this is an all huge like through line that you can read to read Scott Snyder's entire vision of the DC universe. You have Greg Capullo doing art for most of it. This one you have art by Jock. It is incredible. I loved it. It was a blast to read. I own most of these, if not all of these, in single issues. However, I'm very happy to own them in collected editions. I love the crisis. Like I said, this was my favorite because this was the one that was my crisis. and I think it's fantastic. I cannot wait until that omnibus comes out for Death Metal. I'm glad they're not making us wait as long as they made us wait for this one, but that brings an end to the Crisis Omnibuses. Let's jump into my conclusions. Maybe I'll do a giveaway, and there you have it, folks. Every DC Crisis Omnibus ever. Books that destroyed the multiverse, unified the time stream, brought the multiverse back, ushered in a new continuity, and destroys the source wall. I love every one of these books. This is like 40 years of DC publication history, and they're all incredible. Now, for those of you that have been watching this whole time, we have another giveaway. I'm going to give out a trade of Infinite Crisis, so we'll give it maybe about 2 weeks. Comment down below, #InfiniteCrisis, and we'll pick a winner. Someone in the continental United States. I'm not going to ship it to Alaska or another country. I'm sorry, Bar. However, I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Comment down below what your favorite omnibus is. And if you want to pick up any of these books, you can go to our sponsor, Organic Price Books. There, if you're buying 1 or 2 books, you can use the code Braveboys to save $2. Or if you're shipping 3 or more books together, you can use the code Braveboyssit to save 5%. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and comment down below what your favorite crisis was. Thanks so much for watching. Keep reading and stay brave.